I'd like to say welcome to our guests and especially to our panelists, who I will introduce in just a moment. Welcome to the first part in our three-part webinar series, From Pandemic to Progress: Innovations, Interventions, and Lessons from Districts. I'm Jennifer Sheets. I'm a partner here at Bellwether Education Partners on our policy and evaluation team. We are a national nonprofit dedicated to dramatically improving education and life outcomes for underserved students. We support schools, districts, public agencies, and education organizations with a blend of research, evaluation, and strategic advising. We help our partners answer critical questions about policy and practice across the education continuum. So as all of us in and around the education space right now know, our education systems are at a critical inflection point right now. We're beginning to see the possibility of the end of COVID's most intensive constraints on how we operate our schools, and are really beginning to think hard about how to really put our feet on the gas for kids to address the impact of COVID and accelerate learning and opportunity going forward. Our hope for this three-part series is to hear directly from education's frontline, from school district leaders about what they've learned through COVID's disruption, which innovations, interventions, and lessons from the past they will carry forward into the future, and how they're thinking about effectively and equitably serving the most marginalized students, despite the great challenges that preceded the pandemic and have just been exacerbated by it. Today's focus will be on policy and on planning. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll have sessions that focus more on operations and outreach and on academics and instruction. So I would imagine we'll touch on all of those topics across all three of these webinars. I hope you enjoy today's session and that you'll join us over the next couple of weeks for the rest of them. Both of the leaders on our panel today have embarked on new plans and initiatives, I think as all local leaders have had to do during this pandemic. And we'll talk with them today about what they've learned, about their go-forward plans, and how policies and funding, including the recent federal stimulus, are affecting those plans. I will tell you that we won't even scratch the surface of what we can learn from our two guests today. So I would encourage our audience members to submit questions as they occur to you. We do have team members monitoring the chat and the Q&A, and we'll take some time to answer some audience questions at the end. I'm thrilled today to be joined by Dr. Adrienne Battle and Dr. Tony Watlington. Dr. Battle is the director of Metro Nashville Public Schools in Tennessee, which serves just under 90,000 students. She officially took on the director role about a year ago after having served as an interim director for a little less than a year prior to that. She served multiple roles in Nashville schools and in the district, as a teacher, in school leadership roles and in principalships, and as a community superintendent prior to taking on the role of director. And for your context, currently all Nashville Public School students have the option of attending school full-time in person, and they're operating a hybrid model. Dr. Watlington is the superintendent of Rowan-Salisbury schools in my home state of North Carolina, not too far from me actually, just a bit northeast of Charlotte. His district serves about 20,000 students in 35 schools. Dr. Watlington became superintendent just this past December, which I am anxious to hear about what that experience has been like, after having served as chief of schools in nearby Guilford County. He began his career as a history teacher. He's a North Carolina native and the first in his family to attend college. Welcome to you both, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So as we dig in, I want to start by asking you how you're feeling about the successes and challenges of this past year. What have you learned about planning and really what's required to be as adaptable as you've had to be as leaders through this pandemic? I'll go first to Dr. Battle, but Dr. Watlington, please feel free to jump in.
Sure. Well, first off, thank you so much for the invitation to be here today, and welcome to all those who are joining this webinar. It's great to be in great presence with you all as we discuss responses to the pandemic. To that specific question, we've learned a lot around planning and adaptability, critical to everything that we do from day to day, and definitely on behalf of the students that we have the ability to serve. We are extremely proud of what our teachers, our students, and their parents have been able to accomplish despite all of the challenges. This experience has brought us together in ways that we couldn't have imagined before. We have the pleasure right now in Metro Nashville Public Schools to be offering the in-person option to all students and families who prefer that structure to learn in. But we didn't start there. We started our school year all virtual for all of our MNPS students. And because of our community spread and resources and having mitigation strategies in place, we've now landed in this space to offer the in-person option to all students and families. Our teachers have honed their skills of technology and found new ways to engage with their students outside of the normal classroom setting. I have been impressed, I have been encouraged by our educators' ability to build their capacity during this time of change and really navigating an experience that we've never experienced before. Our students have taken greater ownership of their education through a combination of synchronous and asynchronous learning opportunities, two terms that were not even that familiar to us in education in the pre-K 12 space prior to the pandemic. But it is just common language now as we think through and work through and plan around providing live lessons and those asynchronous lessons for our students. Our parents, our students' parents have been very supportive in assisting their kids, especially the youngest ones. And part of our phase-in plan recognized that for our exceptional education students and for our youngest learners, that we wanted to prioritize getting them back into the in-person learning environment as quickly as we could. We knew that critical planning and being able to adapt to what we'll call our new normal of educating our students in our buildings was needed to ensure that we could support our youngest learners and our exceptional education students. But our parents have stepped up in ways like never before to make sure that they were supporting their students and their learning progress could continue. Our parents have been more engaged in their students' education than years past, and that is something that we want to continue as we're moving forward. We have uncovered new ways to engage with our families and for them to continue their learning experience for their students once they get home. And on the district level, we've brought all our teams together from our operations to academics and collaborated and were able to troubleshoot. We've planned for multiple contingencies along the way. If we recall, this time last year and even going into the summer, most of us were unsure of how we would open up our doors in August. And so we've continued with those contingencies and we've adapted throughout this pandemic that offered no certainty, but uncertainty. Lots that we did not know. So when it comes to planning and adaptability, they've been critical to the work of MNPS as well as school districts across the country as we continue to navigate this specific school year.
Mhm. And Dr. Watlington, how has it been stepping into your role in December in the midst of all this? And how are you thinking about planning and adapting?
Let me say first, it's been just an awesome experience. What I've learned about planning and adapting is that certainly when you have a very fine school district with the impeccable staff and great community like the Rowan-Salisbury schools, it makes it easier to navigate the challenges that we face in the pandemic. I'll say a couple of things. First, March 13th of last year will be a day that lives in infamy, just kind of like that famous date in World War II. As you can tell, I was a former history teacher. First, we've approached the challenges in our school district from a standpoint that we're not going to go backwards. We're not going to be status quo with the pandemic notwithstanding, but we're going to continue a culture of innovation. This school district is the only renewal school district out of 115 school districts in North Carolina, which essentially means that we have charter-like flexibility, great flexibility in terms of curriculum, budget, personnel, and calendars. Now, here's what we've learned about policy and procedures in that process. One, the pandemic and our understanding of which kids have devices. Luckily, all of our kids have devices here because we transitioned to a one-to-one district years ago. But when we think about broadband access and kids' ability to navigate all of those pieces, it has put front and central for us the issue of equity. And how do you make sure that equity is hardwired into policy, that we have a common definition about what equity is, and how do you know when it's occurring? Second thing I'll share with you that's been interesting since transitioning here as superintendent during the middle of a pandemic, that folks said that's the worst time to transition as a superintendent is in a pandemic. I don't disagree. However, we've been able to really utilize the engagement, online engagement, to actually do more interactions than we might have done with parents, students, community, and business partners via this online platform than perhaps we would have done face-to-face. So we've been very intentional about not slowing down to make sure that the transitions are very, very effective. In fact, we're well on our way to developing a new district strategic plan, which will be informed by our trend data and this robust feedback we're getting from our citizens here in Rowan County and within the and from our staff in the Rowan-Salisbury schools. The last thing, we've learned to be more intentional about how we use our time.
So as you all start to think, as you continue to think, I'm sure, about summer and next school year, what's top of mind for you? What are the highest priority challenges that you're anticipating, and where are you most focusing in terms of strategies to meet those challenges? Dr. Battle.
You know, with regards to our biggest challenge, we still don't know where we'll be with the pandemic by August 2021. So all of the contingency planning will continue. Again, as we think about planning and adaptability, we're planning for that as we're moving into next school year. This school year, we were given great flexibility to offer virtual and in-person learning. And for us here in Tennessee, that option is being taken away for us next year. And so we're having to be even more innovative around how we continue to educate and support our students, some of which who have been very successful and thriving in the virtual learning space. And so we're really trying to hone all of the successes from this school year, being innovative, being creative around how we can leverage those practices as we move into the upcoming school year. We are fortunate that we do have a great virtual school already operating that will enhance and expand, but it will look very different next school year than it has looked in years past, because we've learned a lot around educating our students in the virtual space, everything of looking through the lens, as was already mentioned, the lens of equity, looking through the academic press, also how we're supporting our students through their social emotional learning. In terms of what we need to do in the classroom, we need to leverage the hundreds of millions in federal funding to be innovative and creative on how we use our time. So that might be a theme today, something that we've all reflected on, how we really leverage our time, given that these are non-recurring funds, but we can enhance the academic and social emotional learning progress of our students if we're able to leverage our time in those funds in a very effective way. We have a lot of great programs in the works through the lens of equity here in MNPS. During this pandemic, we've launched a Navigator Program where we've connected adults to each individual students in small cohorts, where we're having frequent touch points with our students to ensure that they have the appropriate supports, wraparound supports, and connections to keep them moving both academically and social emotionally as they continue out through this school year. And that's a program that we're planning to continue post-pandemic. We have a new literacy framework. There was a lot we knew about literacy with our students prior to the pandemic. We've learned even more throughout the pandemic. And so we've launched a new literacy framework. We've launched high dosage tutoring for our students and what we call the gold standard in frequency and how we pair our students and the instructional materials that are leveraged for the high dosage tutoring during the school day. along with a host of other PD opportunities. But we look to learn from other school districts around our state and throughout the country to borrow good ideas and refine the ones we already have in place. But our commitment has been that based upon what we've learned during this pandemic, we want to continue those practices, those structures, and even those policies that have helped our students thrive throughout this unique school year. All of this will be put towards a collective goal of improving our individual focused outcomes for our students. We've established key outcomes around literacy, numeracy, SEL, and transitions for our students, because our transitions have been greatly impacted. And we've put this all under the umbrella of every student known. If there is anything that I've taken away from this pandemic and what our parents are demanding from us and what our staff is capable of providing, is making sure that every MNPS student is known, that they're cared for, and that we're serving their needs properly. And this has resulted in us, we're moving forward with pushing out a personalized student dashboard for each student so that they, their parents, their teachers can follow their progress and make the adjustments to their learning plans and layer in support to achieve better results. And so again, we're taking and leveraging the experiences throughout this pandemic, and we're keeping them top of mind and prioritizing everything that we do, putting as we move forward through the lens of equity around academics, around their social emotional learning, and making sure that they're properly transitioning from grade to grade and even off into their post-secondary and career opportunities.
I think Dr. Battle is spot on there. In fact, I'm going to reinforce a couple of points she made. Like Metro Nashville, we have a virtual school that we're very, very proud of. We anticipate that enrollment will be lower next year as we transition more students back to face-to-face instruction in our other schools. But this virtual learning space has cast this intense flashlight, if you will, on virtual learning, which kids are successful and why, perhaps why not for some. It's made us think about how do we recruit teachers in a virtual space? How do you best train and develop teachers for a virtual space? We're more intentional about that now, I would say, certainly than we were maybe a year or two ago, or certainly before the pandemic hit. Like Metro and Dr. Battle, we'd love to be your partners and learn from you and learn from each other in that virtual space. We're all learning together here. She also talked about the importance of using the significant federal dollars that all of our school districts will be receiving wisely. I think it's really important that we not squander these resources away, and we not just do the same thing we've done for 100 years, just because that's the way we've done it. In fact, we're looking for every single opportunity in this innovative Rowan-Salisbury School District to implement our directional system, which really focuses on what are some key levers in terms of academic performance, in terms of unique life goals and interpersonal skills, or what some folks will call the soft skills, that we can reimagine and redo public education. So we want to make sure we have a return on investment for every evidence-based practice, and we spend resources on what we know works, and we have clear, compelling data to say it works and not do the other things. And then finally, as we continue to focus on equity and run all of our strategies through an equity framework, to include to look at how our kids are doing based on race, gender, economically disadvantaged status, students with disabilities, English language learners, and the like. We think there are two things that we want to really dig into in the upcoming year. One of those things is social and emotional learning. You hear about it all the time, but it's kind of built into our directional system, which is our roadmap for this new accountability system that we're developing in the district. It's interesting because nationally, when polls have been done to ask parents, what do you prefer? More of a singular focus on hard data points relative to academic performance as measured by testing, or should we move that pendulum more in the direction of social and emotional supports? Historically in the country, we've been very strong on straight academics as measured by test scores and test scores alone. I am certain that as we have had to deal with adolescent depression, suicide rates going up, this pandemic, I think, is going to fundamentally change our orientation to be more focused on social and emotional learning and not to see it as fluff or soft stuff. The other thing that we're pioneering in Rowan-Salisbury schools is that as a part of our directional system, we are really looking down the road at how we can grow in that direction of competency-based education. We're a time where we think differently about time and these artificial beginning and end points of 180 days in schools. But how do we really personalize the learning so that kids connect with their interests and their passions? Not that we're going to de-emphasize testing or not pay attention to testing, but we feel like if we do some of these other things in tandem with the focus on testing, we're going to improve testing and we're going to help kids have better overall life-changing outcomes. So we're excited about the work we're doing in competency-based education as we move out of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Super exciting. So Dr. Watlington, just to build on that, what will success look like for you at this time next year? What would you like to be able to say about your students, your staff, and your system as a whole at the 2-year mark since when after schools first shut down?
Absolutely. One, we want to have a complete board-approved and team-supported district strategic plan, which says, here are our goals for the next 4 or 5 years and the strategies that we're going to use to meet those goals, as well as a clear understanding of how we're going to prioritize the use and alignment of our time, our budget resources, and professional development, which we think is very important. Secondly, we want to be more intentional about having equity conversations and a focus on equity so that we can really drill down to what is it that all of our different student groups need. We're a diverse school district, which is about 55% white, 45% students of color, with those 2 largest groups being Hispanic and African-American students. Equity lets us to really think about what do all of our different student groups need, and to get down to that granular level of analysis. We're also a rural and suburban district with an urban core. And so we want to be open to looking at maybe different schools and different parts of our community needs something different. So we're trying to think about what is it that we all want to do and what do we need to differentiate based on any particular areas. And then certainly the third thing we want to do within 2 years, we want to be well on our way to reducing, if not eliminating, any state identified low performing schools. We think if we're going to get an unprecedented influx of dollars from the federal government, we want to take advantage of this moment in time to improve every academic indicator while also attending to unique life goals that kids have, and also attending to interpersonal development and skills. So if we can do those 3 things well, we'll be well on our way to do the kind of work we're supposed to be doing as North Carolina's only renewal school district.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dr. Battle, what about your headlines? What do you want to be able to say at your press conference in a year from now about what's happened in Metro Nashville schools?
Yes, and I'll share what we will be able to say 2 years from now. And I'll say, Dr. Watlington, spot on with where you are going with your district. I think we're thinking along the same terms around how we can leverage our time and our resources. And you definitely have a partner in Metro Nashville Public Schools. You know, I want to be able to say that we came out of this pandemic with a better understanding and a deeper knowledge of ourselves and those we serve. And I think it speaks to what was just shared. We need to be able to adapt and adjust our services, our supports specifically to the individual needs of our students and the various communities of students that we serve. I want us to be able to say that we were able to do the hard work of long-term planning and goal setting. I mean, the actions that we take now, the way that we leverage our time and our funds as we're moving forward, I'm expecting will have a long-term impact on our students, on our school district, and for our city. And, you know, doing all of this while in the midst of an emergency response response effort that started for us in early March. What some of you may not know about Nashville is that just about a week prior to closing our doors last year for the pandemic, we closed our doors due to a devastating tornado that came through our city. And much like Dr. Watlington's story here, I was named director of schools, permanent director of schools, the day after we closed our doors due to the pandemic. And so it has definitely been a space where there was no playbook for this, but we've had to create one for long-term benefits of our students in our district. I want to be able to say that we found new ways to meet the individual student needs and delivered focused outcomes for all of the children that we serve. You know, we've had a lot of conversations around, you know, learning loss. We're embracing learning progress because there are lots of ways that our students have progressed during this time of the pandemic. We were a district that could only dream about being a one-to-one technology district prior to the pandemic and closing that gap. The digital divide for our students. And now we're a one-to-one technology district, and our students have honed skills during this pandemic that we've not been able to execute upon prior to. And so I'm hoping that we can, we will leverage these experiences, the technology integration that we have, building upon many of those 21st century skills that we all discuss and are aware of for our students as we continue our momentum and executing upon our outcomes over the next year or two.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what do you need to do that work that you don't already have as you think about state policy, federal policy, local policy? Are there policy opportunities or changes or resources that would help you realize that vision that you don't currently have? Dr. Battle?
Yeah, another great question. You know, at the start of the conversation, I mentioned even our approach to virtual learning opportunities for next year, and you know, the policies that will limit us and what we can do. But again, our commitment is still to be innovative, creative, and responsive to the needs of our students. And you know, my advocacy is that from a LEA's position, from the director's seat, that we all take what we've learned during this pandemic and not look back. This should be a space where we're opening up doors of opportunity because we have learned so much and expanded the ways in which we connect with our students, engage with them, and educate them. You know, I welcome cooperative support from our state. As a large urban district and a more conservative state, it can sometimes feel like we're pitted against each other. But I recognize, and many of my colleagues recognize, that there are plenty of opportunities for us to work together towards a common goal of supporting all of our state's students. And, you know, even in this conversation, being able to, you know, just think nationally about leveraging best practices for the benefit and policies that really speak to achieving outcomes for our students. We will continue to leverage state resources for literacy. We're launching one of the largest summer learning programs we're calling Promising Scholars than we've ever had before. We'll continue to leverage additional supports that are coming from the state around mental health supports for our youth to better achieve our own goals. But I think that this is a space when it comes to policy opportunities for us to grow and learn around, whether that be virtual learning, whether that be around the way in which we connect students to address chronic absenteeism, policies that help us expand the reach of our social emotional learning opportunities for all of our students. And I would be remiss if I didn't speak to policies that have an impact at the higher education level for our students to have long pathways of success and transitions to their post-secondary opportunities. Everything from enrollment to course access, and those wraparound services that prove to be successful for them in the pre-K-12 space.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Watlington, are there tools that you don't yet have in your toolbox from a policy point of view that would be helpful to realize the vision that you laid out?
Well, I'll tell you, an advantage that I have that the other 114 superintendents in North Carolina don't have is this very expansive flexibility in the area of curriculum, budget, personnel, and calendar. So in the area of curriculum, one, we want to have guaranteed viable curriculum that we have in every single school in Rowan-Salisbury schools. We also think that, well, we know that we have too many standards. So we have more flexibility to be really clear about, instead of teaching a curricula that are 7 miles long and 1 inch deep, our district has done good work over the past couple of years to be able to hone those standards down and to really focus on what will we get the greatest return on student learning. The same thing is true with budget flexibility and calendar. I think that we're in an advantage, and that's why we want to do such a good job with this renewal school district, so that we can pave the way to show that if you give school districts flexibility like we have, we can improve our return on learning through multiple measures that we'll use. I want to say one quick thing about time. Our calendar flexibility is not limited to just when the school year starts or ends. While that's very important, North Carolina, you have some districts that are out in the western part of the state where they get lots of snow in the mountains and they miss a lot of school days, and it's a little bit different as you transition down to the coast. So that flexibility in terms of time is not limited to just when we start the school year or how we do that, which is pretty prescribed in North Carolina. We also think there's a case to be made coming out of this pandemic to radically change how we think about time for students in terms of multi-age grouping, in terms of should the start and end time be 180 days? Should it be more based on the mastery of content and then we move on to the next thing, or perhaps even the next grade level? And what are the implications for that on staffing, funding, teacher professional development, hiring practices? We've just begun to touch the tip of that iceberg and to think about that. But I think it's going to be important to do that. Lastly, I also am excited that Dr. Battle mentioned something about the tutoring initiatives. We're going to move in a direction in a post-pandemic of doing a couple of things. I think it's important to really study what has been the real true impact of this pandemic on teachers. If the research says that teachers are the single most predictable ingredient in student learning, followed only by great principals who hire those teachers and develop them, what's been the impact of the pandemic on teachers in terms of their practice, their mindset? Are we attending to their social and emotional learning? There's a superintendent in another state who always talks about joyful learning and experiences. I always think about that from a social emotional learning standpoint for teachers. One of the things we know is we're going to have all hands on deck. Teachers can't do everything to mitigate and address learning loss. So we're going to also be intentional about hiring local college students. Maybe we'll get to the point of doing it for some high school students to get some really robust training with some external partners so that they can line up with teachers and deliver that high quality tutoring in literacy and math, which wealthy kids have always had that opportunity. We think this is an opportunity to level the playing field and let other kids have that same opportunity, which should be a basic right for every kid.
I have one more question, and then we'll shift to audience questions. But we started this conversation talking about kind of the process of planning and planning to be adaptive. As you look ahead, how are you thinking about sort of building that kind of resilience into your ongoing planning and leadership cycles? Are there things that you will do differently going forward? As Dr. Battle, you talked quite a bit about contingency planning and making sure that you had a path for whatever emerged. How are you thinking about resiliency going forward and how you plan for that as a leader?
Well, during this year, our students, our staff, parents, everyone has really demonstrated their resilience and being able to stay focused on where we should be with all of our students. And as we're talking about contingency planning, one of our key levers here is around making sure that we're focused where the focus needs to be. So we have, again, launched our initiative around every student being known, and our commitment to everything from our academics to our social emotional learning, again, to the transitions, to ensure that we have a path of continuous improvement, and leveraging all of our district resources to achieve those outcomes. And so we're looking to create strong partnerships both internally and externally. I think I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the external partnerships, and the ways in which our partners have stepped up and adapted with us. And in the words of my team, not doing to us, but working with us to meet the needs of our students, our staff, and our families during this time. And so we will continue to rely on our model of continuous improvement, being layer focused on every student being known through those buckets that we know we have expectations for every student along the way. We've been able to shore up in our district our cross collaborative planning. We now know how much more important it is to have that cross collaborative planning so we do not lose sight of our intended outcomes for all of our students, but bringing every stakeholder in so that they truly have a voice and that we can be meeting everyone's needs along the way. And, you know, I think it was beautifully stated that our students have great needs, but our staff who've adapted continuously through this year have needs as well. And so we want to make sure that from the student lens, the teacher lens, the parent lens, and all of our partners, that we're addressing where the needs and the gaps exist, but definitely the opportunities that will help us stay focused and continue to execute with excellence.
And Jennifer, to just add on to what Dr. Battle said, she talked about this continuous improvement model, trying to learn everything we can. I think that's really, really important. And the more we learn to relearn and are conscious about thinking about that and not take for granted what we think we know based on 100 years of practice, but to always ask ourselves, is this the best way to do it? Are we really getting at root cause analysis in our work processes? And to what extent are we really practicing our definitions of equity? In addition to that, I think that by focusing on social and emotional learning for teachers in particular and our other professional staff, I think will help people to continue to accept and feel good about what we don't know and the things we're trying to learn as we move in this post-pandemic space, because we all have to be nimble and we have to be able to turn that super tanker around in a small lake in a short period of time. And so I really think we're still just touching the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we think we know and root causes and where we'll go from here. But we want teachers to be well outfitted to feel good about the direction we're moving in. And so we've got our tentative.
Very good. Well, we have covered a lot of ground, and I want to make sure we get to some audience questions. I have quite a few here. So let me start with Dr. Watlington. We have a question about competency-based. So would moving towards a more competency-based approach change the way you think about grade level?
Oh, at some point, absolutely, because grade levels ought not in a true competency-based education model. Now, we're not there yet, and we're at the early stages of this work, but a year's worth of learning, who's to say a year's worth of learning is exactly 180 days, as we typically think about it in North Carolina? Why not 170 days? Why not 185 days or 1,000 hours of seat time? In Japan, I think it's 220 days is the traditional school year. We want a true model de-emphasizes seat time and focuses more on mastery. If Tony Watlington can master the material in 180 days, Dr. Adrienne Battle can do it in 140 days. Why does she need to hang around with me and keep doing the same things if she's ready to go to the next thing? And so I think that makes a lot of sense. It has great implications for how we train to do that kind of work, how we continue to ensure rigor for all students. It has some equity considerations, but in its truest sense, competency-based education is a very good thing, and it's a pioneering thing, and I commend the Rowan-Salisbury schools for exploring this innovative practice.
Mhm. Dr. Battle, how has the past year changed the way you think about absenteeism and student engagement going forward?
I think the perfect example of what's changed our thinking about chronic absenteeism and engagement for our students was the basis of our Navigator program here in Metro Nashville Public Schools. It was something that we did anticipate coming into the school year, but we anticipated the need, but I will tell you there was a greater need than we anticipated as we were doing all of our contingency planning. And the reason for that Navigator program being launched was because of what we were already seeing prior to the pandemic with regards to engagement and our focus on decreasing chronic absenteeism, particularly during a time where all students were learning virtually. And so that Navigator program allowed us to build strong relationships with our students. When we interview our parents and when we get feedback from our students, in a time of navigating a pandemic, our engagement data has been stronger than ever before. And we attribute a lot of that to the Navigator program, having that reliable, consistent, trustworthy adult who connects and engages students around all things education. And there's really no limit around their questions and their supports for academics to social emotional learning. We address family needs. So if there's a need for food or if there's a housing situation, our teams are equipped with a process by which we can get those students and families needs addressed immediately. And so that was one way that we wanted to make sure that we were connecting with every student. Again, our motto is every student known. And so that expectation is that on a weekly and biweekly basis, we're making those connections for every student. And we're not just leveraging teachers. We know our teachers have had to step up and be all things to everyone during this pandemic. We are leveraging our support staff. We're leveraging our central office support. Everyone in MNPS is considered a navigator. And we're leveraging their relationships and their ability to connect with students, to engage them, and to decrease chronic absenteeism. And I mentioned early on that this is a program that will continue on in Metro Nashville Public Schools. We were not thinking this way prior to the pandemic, but it is definitely a structure by which that our schools are already planning for and how they're leveraging their time and their resources moving into next school year. And we've been fortunate that since the start of the school year until now, we've been able to decrease our chronic absenteeism, and we've been tracking through a very robust data system the conversations and the resources that we're providing to students to ensure that we continue to have a strong return on investment given the structure that we have in place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was reading about the Navigator program yesterday, and it was fascinating, super interesting.
Well, when you talk about time, that's the first thing that came up in question for our staff is when we have the time to do it. And so we had to create the right conditions in order for us to have the right time and the right leaders leading the work.
So Jennifer, you should just know that, immediately after this webinar, I'm going to either be on the phone with Dr. Battle or on her website looking up this Navigator piece. We had a good number of young people during the pandemic who were in the process of leaving the district to go to work. And our folks really wrapped their arms around them to make sure that we continue to make the good progress we've been making with graduation rates going up, dropout rates going down. But there are some challenges in the middle of this pandemic, and families who had to work and folks who had to take care of childcare needs. And so anything we can do more intentionally, we're always looking for that. So I'm looking forward to learning more about Navigator.
Well, and I'm glad to be able to facilitate that connection. Wonderful. Well, we are close to time, so I want to make sure that we end on time and respect everybody's schedules, but want to give one last opportunity for closing remarks, final words. I'll go to you first, Dr. Watlington. Parting shots here.
All right, great. Well, first, on behalf of Rowan-Salisbury School District, thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this wonderful conversation with Dr. Battle. She mentioned their kind of motto or thinking, so I'll go ahead and tell you that part of our vision and mission is that students will experience an extraordinary education every day. And we are absolutely committed to that before a pandemic, and we're even more committed to that after we exit the pandemic. We also pride ourselves on encouraging each other to be originals. So we're going to continue to grow this spirit of innovation, to ask, what is it that we think we know that maybe we don't know? Is there a different way to do this? Is there a better way to do this? And to be very intentional about asking those questions. And then at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we improve academic achievement for all student groups and attend to those other areas in our directional system, to include a focus on unique life goals and interpersonal skills, so that we're not just preparing kids to do well on the test. We're going to do that. We also want to prepare our students to have life-changing outcomes and opportunities down the road, so that they have healthier, wealthier, and more successful families, and that they are certainly contributing to adults in our democracy. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Battle?
I could not agree more. Thank you, Dr. Watlington, for sharing that. This is a time and a space for us to be reimagining public education, not falling back on our heels and doing more of the same from years past. And so that's my word of encouragement. That's what I try to empower our team and all of our stakeholders around. Our Board of Education is committed to this work. We have established our 4 core tenets as a district. We are re-envisioning our central office as a support hub. There are no pointing fingers. We're looking to be critical thought partners with our schools and adjusting everything that we do, reimagining it in ways that better support our students. We're focusing on empowering and equipping leaders at all levels. This pandemic also was able to show us that no matter what role any of our employees are serving in, what seats they're sitting in, everyone matters. I mean, our bus drivers, our nutrition services, our support staff have gone above and beyond to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our students. And so we're really focusing on providing the professional development and building capacity of all the great leaders across our district. And I think this is a time in public education to really acknowledge that and pour into our people so that can pour into our students. This is a time to create and support engaging, rigorous, and personalized learning experiences for all students. We've got to peel back those layers, get down to the individual needs of every student across our districts, across our states, and across our country. And last but not least, I guess my parting words is we have to continue to identify and eliminate inequities that we see in our systems. We've gone other days of just surface level talking about those inequities. We have to do something about them, and we can change the paths of success for our students if we can commit to that and create the right conditions for those conversations to happen.
I second that.
That is a perfect note to end on. Thank you both very much for your time today. I know you have difficult, challenging, time-consuming jobs, and we're very grateful for your spending some time with us today. Thank you to our audience members for joining us, and we hope that you will join us for the next 2 installments in this series and learn from more innovative leaders across the country. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to be with you.